Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Demystify Selling with Microsoft. And I'm excited for my guest today, Andrew Montz. So, Andrew, I have known Andrew for a number of years now, and Andrew is actually one of the first coaches I hired to help me as I was building my Microsoft partner going back, almost 10 years ago now. So, Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. And today we're going to dig into a topic that, I learned a lot from you about this topic, and I really want to share that with our audience. But before we get into the topic of productization and accelerating your Microsoft sales engine, maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, because I think it's really relevant for what we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so my background is heavily in technology services, primarily with consulting companies and managed service operations. I had the pleasure to be part of 6 private tech growth companies. We were blessed with 4 different exit events over that journey over 30 years. And I learned from some of the best in the industry, and I've learned some lessons and scar tissue over the way. So looking forward to sharing that with the audience.
Yeah, so as we're getting into this, one of the things that I found super valuable, Andrew, was that you shared a ton of lessons with me, sort of those battle scars that you talked about. You shared those, and I thought that that would be a great place for us to start is to hear some of your lessons learned throughout your journey of those 6 different companies. And I know a couple of them were directly Microsoft related, and maybe all of them. So I'd love if you could just take a few minutes and share with our audience some of those lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of scar tissue, and I had more hair before I went down that journey as well. Yeah, so 3 of those were Microsoft partners, 3 partnered with other technologies. This covers 30 years, so obviously a lot of different technology innovation ways. But that's one of the first lessons that I learned was find an innovation and technology, get attached to it, build credibility and expertise, and ride that wave to growth, right? Which means you have to differentiate yourself as well. Some of the other differentiators as I look back over that journey had to do with how we partnered with organizations. We put a lot of investment into partnering, and Rob, that's something you and I have talked a lot about over the years as well. But we always found a way of generating a wonderful partnership that led to a lot of client acquisition. Spent a lot of time with relationships with clients, built wonderful teams with a lot of expertise on them, and really built some great cultures along the way. But probably the number one thing that I learned from all of that is what we're talking about here today, which is around the concept of taking very custom services and turn them into as close to a product as you possibly can to make them easy to sell.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think that for this audience here today, whether you're a systems integrator or an MSP that really wants to make an impact in the Microsoft ecosystem, that was one of the biggest lessons learned I took away from working with you, Andrew, was that really trying to move away from everything being custom. And I understand there's always a place for custom work, but when you got to a place where you could define your services and you could productize your services, that's really where I think there was a ton of leverage. I realized personally a ton of leverage in that concept. So I'd love to dive deeper in it and just kind of hear how you go through that journey of thinking about productization of services.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, when you're delivering customized services, your sales process can get complex. It can drag on a long time. And let's face it, from a selling or a partnering perspective, time is not our friend. The longer something goes through a sales process, the more likely something bad happens, right? So one of the things I learned was what can we do to streamline and accelerate that interaction with our clients and frankly with our partners? Because the same motion that happens with our clients happens with our partners around our message and how we sell. And so there's 4 things that I found are really the pillars of productization, right? The first one is having really clear value. Value not defined in your terms, but defined in the terms of the client. How do you clarify that value and present it? So we can talk some more about that. The second thing is really having limited options, even in highly customized services. My background is application development, obviously a very customized service.
Right.
There's always a way to limit the options, right? Reduce the menu size and accelerate things. So that's the second thing, limited options. The
Yeah.
third thing is as you productize your service and really create something that's repeatable, you can build almost a factory around the way that you deliver that service. You get more efficient at it. You can add innovation, automation, and reduce your costs and increase your quality of delivery at the same time, which is kind of rare. The fourth thing is you treat it as a product. Invest in the roadmap, invest in the features, invest in the capabilities of the service, and really enrich the offering over time. And you'll find you'll increase the value and frankly increase your margin at the same time by doing that. So those are the four key things that I would say after productization.
I love that. Just kind of, so I'll recap to make sure I heard that, is that talk about, the four components are really value, but not value from your perspective, but value from your client's perspective. What is it that they hope to get out of that? Um, and then the next component was limiting the options. So it's not this giant menu or like a Cheesecake Factory menu.
Exactly.
It's much more refined and much more delineated. And then the third component was the delivery engine. So refine and optimize your delivery engine. Did I get that one right?
Absolutely.
And then finally is to invest in the roadmap and really know where you're going, know where you'd like to take that. And I imagine that, the roadmap is always in flux. We see in the Microsoft ecosystem with Copilot coming in on the scene. And, that's got to change you've got to be ready to flex for that type of thing. So I love those four things. And I'd love it if we could go sort of one by one and really peel back the onion on each of those four.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the clarifying value component of it. And I'm going to go very traditional in professional services and technology services. When I first started my career 30 plus years ago, everything was billed by the hour. That was
Mhm.
the unitive measure of value. Well, from a provider perspective, sure, that represents your cost structure. It represents how you measure some things in your business, but it really doesn't have a lot of value from a client's perspective unless you're doing just traditional staff augmentation. But even that, I would argue, that's not really the goal the client's after. They're not after consumption of hours. They're after production of something, right? Whatever that thing is. And so in our industry, we missed an opportunity to really think about what is value to the client. And I'll give an example here. Done a lot of migrations to the cloud over the last 5, 10 years, right? And many of those were driven by some external event. Maybe it was a migration of technology innovation, but we found a lot of merger and acquisition activity was driving a lot of cloud migrations in the last several years. Organizations coming together and needing to migrate. Well, their sense of value is they're going through an M&A process. They have a deadline. If they miss the deadline, it costs them money or it causes problems in M&A, right? So pricing a project for migration into the cloud by hours has nothing to do with the value of getting that M&A deal done. And it's one of 100 things that you get it done. And so as service providers, latching on to what the client's trying to get done, the bigger context of their value, what they're trying to do, knowing our migration is one piece of that puzzle. They've got people integration, they've got organizational changes that are going on, leadership teams coming together. They're a public company, all the investor relations stuff around that. Migration is a little piece. So how do we attach value to that? So one of the things I've learned is if you can look at your pricing and the value that you have and tie it to something that's valuable to the customer, can you create pricing milestones around their journey of M&A? Tie value to that other than hours. Because at the end of the day, the client doesn't really care how much time you spend. They need to get it done by a deadline.
Right.
Maybe you increase your price the faster you get it done because it takes pressure off the M&A situation, right? Just to take that example.
Yeah, and I love that because whether it's an M&A situation or you're switching providers or whatever it might be, it's really peeling back and really understanding what's the business outcome the client wants. It's not about the technology, it's not about the hours, it's about what's that business outcome. And I think that you really nailed it when we talk about value to the client and creating when you're creating this product type service, being sure that you're clear on that and being sure that your team is clear on that and you're articulating it. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, just to add on a little bit into that value component, sometimes you can't take a technology service and tie it to some business metric on the client side, but you still want to think about the way you price, the way you present your value in the context of what the client's trying to do, right? So value is not always a function of just the pricing mechanism. It's how you talk and what you do as part of the service, right? You're really trying to deliver on something that is in the client's mind and what they're trying to get to. right? And so one of the things we often do is we lose this concept of asking them what's important, what's valuable to them, and then configuring our service and our offering around what's important to them. Right? You can still have a highly structured offering and align it to the customer's value, right? So the goal here is we have those milestones and we line up with their value, their terms, and we deliver something much higher perceived value than just delivering a project.
Right. I think it's really a mindset approach to
Absolutely.
it's the whole organization having a mindset of adding value to the client. It's not, hey, look how great our service is, look how great we are. It's about how we can help you and that value we can bring to you. So I love that. So let's move on to the next one. And this is one where I think it's probably the biggest challenge. And I know I struggled with it even back when I was sort of going through this with you, is creating this limited set of options. When I think about the Microsoft ecosystem, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a million products, there's a million ways to deploy. But wrapping your mind around really limiting the options and creating, I don't want to call it cookie cutter, repeatable 100% of the time, but being more structured by that. So I'd love you to dig into that and really, help us understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things here, right? I've also been on the buyer side of the equation, and I've had people come to me. I recently built a house, right? I'll use something out of our industry for a minute. And we worked with a builder on building our house. They structured our buying process. They told us up front, hey, this is generally how it looks. Let's talk about what you're going to do, right? And they narrowed it down to a limited set of things for us to focus on. We knew we had tons of design decisions down the road, but we didn't spend a lot of time on that on the front end. It was very structural. How big of a house, the features of the house, that type of thing, right? And that's a highly customized thing. So one of the things that I like to look at, again, I'm going to go back to things that involved a lot of customization because I think that's always the question here. Everybody gets it if you're offering an assessment service. It's easy to productize something that's very brief and very focused. But something more customized, if you've built an estimating model, right? And if you've done a service more than a few times, you ought to have an estimating model when you're going through your scoping. What are your questions you're asking? How do those questions affect the size and the distance of the project, things like that? Well, if you're doing that, you're starting to structure the criteria that make a difference in the sizing of the engagement. Well, one step beyond that is simply bringing that together and saying those are some of the key options along the journey. The other thing is when
Mhm.
you approach a client and you say, hey, what do you want? You feel like you're providing great service by asking them what they want. Well, they probably haven't done this project 100 times like you have. Why are you
Right.
walking in with these general questions? What do you want? Right? Walk in with, hey, here is the best practice. We've done 100 of these, right? We've learned through good and bad experiences. This is the way you want to structure a project like this.
Yeah.
Right? And we're going to limit your options. Why? Because we've learned that certain things are dark alleys and you don't want to go down there. It's going to lead to a higher rate of project failure. So let's focus on the things that really make these projects successful. There are some options, right? Maybe there's some t-shirt sizing, right? You can take things that seem like they have a lot of variation in them. When we look at them in detail, you actually realize, hey, the brain starts going to small, medium, and large and kind of concepts like that.
Yeah.
I remember a project I did many years ago for a company, and this is even in the assessment space. We custom quoted everything. It took us 2 weeks.
Right.
We went in and we said, well, what do you want? The reality was they were 90% the same. We were
Mm.
failing to demonstrate our credibility by not showing the structure and the limited set of options. We went back in and said, okay, we're going to ask you 5 questions. And out of that, we're going to know what t-shirt size it is.
Yeah.
And we're going to immediately give you a price. And we're going to immediately provide a sample delivery. We're going to immediately provide this. And it narrowed down the client's thinking pattern. Like, hey, these guys really know what they're doing. They've made my buying process simple, right? By limiting the field. You mentioned Cheesecake Factory, right? What is that, a 30, 50-page menu, right? Our brains can't consume that many options. What do? We kind of find a section. I'm interested in meat or fish or whatever it might be. You
Right.
focus in on that one, and then you start narrowing your options in that. Do I want something pasta-based or whatever, right? That's our brain trying to simplify the world. Now, if that's the world you live in and you custom scope and price everything, it's complicated. It takes forever. Your client gets frustrated. Bad things happen during that. So what we do is we look for what are those things that really vary the project. And what you find is even in the estimating models, that there's really a subset of those items that move the needle the most. People feel good about the engineering behind that. We have a lot of technical people and they make things complicated sometimes. But
Yeah.
what are the things that move the needle? And sometimes you can bundle those together. I found that bundling options together are kind of like when you buy a car, right? There's different models of a car. There's different levels of the vehicle. You can buy different packages you can buy. That's basically the manufacturer simplifying your buying decision, right? And so that's our goal in this. Take this complex, highly customized thing, come up with a set of options, maybe plans that really define the buying process and create clarity around it. And then you have conversations around the fringe things that truly are options. I'm going to go back to the migration thing for a minute. Having done a lot of those migrations, everybody thinks about them again as a technical thing. I'm going to move these servers into the cloud. I'm going to move these mailboxes from this Azure environment to this other Azure environment, whatever it may be. The reality is that we found half of the project involves organizational people change management, right? So present an option around that. Maybe you can present a light and a heavier version of work change management. You can build in options that actually demonstrate the credibility that you have, that you've done this more than once, right? When you go in and you say, what do you want? It doesn't look like you know what you're talking about. Right?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the analogy you started with the building a house. I mean, if a builder doesn't come to you and say, do you want a bathroom or not? It's like, no, you're going to, they know. And I want to know that you've got the credibility to ask me the right questions. And you demonstrate that, to your point, you've been through this dozens, if not hundreds of times. And that reassures me. And it simplifies the buying process for me too. It's, to your point, we all want to sort of be more focused, and we don't want to have a million options. When as a provider, I can simplify those options for you and reassure you that this is going to cover all of your bases. I mean, that to me is just genius. So I love how you framed that, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it made a huge difference in our buying flow was that to our business. We could be signing a contract and possibly starting an engagement before our competitor using kind of that old school custom scoping approach has even had their first scoping meeting or maybe finished their second part in the process. So huge
Right.
differentiator in that.
Yeah, and the time that the end user, the customer, gets to realize the benefit of the business outcome or the consumption of the purchase they made. I mean, there's just so many benefits to streamlining, limiting the options. So let's move on to the third topic, which is refining your delivery engine. So talk to me about that and what you see there.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these things are tied together. If you're not doing all of them together, some of it will fall apart, right? So we talked about limited options.
Yeah.
We have limited options when we're presenting, the configuration of our engagement with the client. What that allows us to do from a delivery perspective is really hone in on what that structure and that standardization and those limited options. We know exactly what's coming out. There's not this failed handoff from those that are helping sell an engagement to a client doing this highly customized thing to the
Mhm.
people that are going to deliver it. Because if those people are different people, which is what happens most of the time, right? You're handing off from the sales or pre-sales engine into a delivery engine. And even if you have overlap, they still have to translate it to the rest of the team. So you create this environment that can be very embarrassing. You ask the
Yeah.
same questions again. You forget what the client already told you, right? And that's how you start your engagement. So when you have these limited options on the front end, we can start to design an engine on the back end. We know exactly what to expect, right? Imagine rather than this highly textual SAL, what we're getting is on more of a config sheet that has a
Mhm.
checkbox on or off, or
Yeah.
some drop down options in some areas. And that's what we get. It's very structured, very specific in the delivery. And we can design our process around that, right? Kicking off the project becomes really simple. It's a verification of those very clear options that you chose. By the way, scope management, which is one of the biggest issues in delivery, becomes a
Yeah.
whole lot more simple because it's clear you chose an option or you didn't choose an option, right? It's
Right.
very, very clear. So I found you have a much less of an issue of customer dissatisfaction on the back end around those issues they thought was included or they hoped was included and it wasn't. And the customer has changing people too, right? So anything we can do to structure that and keep it consistent. Around the delivery factory, this kind of also gets into this whole issue of bill by the hour, right?
Mhm.
In the delivery factory, when you're billing by the hour, that's the unit of measure of how you're judging your team's progress. How many hours did you bill? Well, when you're in a delivery factory and you have certain configuration, you're delivering value for these different options. Now it becomes, have I finished this particular feature, this particular option in my service offering or not? And that's tied directly to the value the clients can perceive, right? Not to some arbitrary thing that's an hour, right? If someone billed 38 versus 40 hours, does it really matter in the client's eyes, or does it matter that they got this change management plan draft by Friday? That's what they're after.
Right.
What we do is we align around that. The second thing related to this is because there's structure around it, and because we're not worried about trying to do things on a team basis, those type of approaches, we can now look at things that are innovative. How can we take the labor out,
Mhm.
right? And let's face it, in the traditional time and certain time and materials business, taking labor out's a negative thing. That means less utilization for the team. Well, that's actually the target we want to have, right? Less
Yeah.
costs at the same price, we're creating margin. So why aren't we investing in this? And if we're doing a service over and over again, we build a factory around that so that our team gets really efficient in how they deliver, even on the things that require manual labor, right? We get really efficient about that. But we also look for opportunities to automate. Let's take the labor out. Let's accelerate. Let's automate the process as much as possible, making it even more repeatable and more cost efficient. Meanwhile, the client actually gets higher value. Why? You're doing it faster. You're doing it with more predictability. So ironically, costs are going down, value is going up at the same time. How often can you do that, right? So that's a big part of that delivery factory, the consistency of the input coming in so they can optimize around it. They can make it more efficient with automation. And by the way, all those improvements lead to the next thing we're going to talk about, which is roadmap.
Well, let's do it. Let's jump right in and talk about roadmap.
Yeah, so roadmap, one of the key things around this in a traditional product management concept, and I've been part of teams that had a software product as well as services. And when you have a product, you have to plan the features that you're going to build or improve. And so that usually goes on something, it's a roadmap. And more often, they're built on a quarterly milestones throughout the year. You're mapping out. And the next quarter or the next sprint, whatever it may be, you get really detailed in what you're going to do because you've got to deliver it in the next quarter. Obviously, a year out, you have things that are on your roadmap that you think you may want to do. They're just a parking lot more than anything else.
Yeah.
But what it is, it's an investment in the improvement of the service. We're getting better at something we're selling a lot of, right?
Yeah.
We're planting those improvements out over the time of year and we're investing in it. Why? We're going to get more efficient, better margin, more effective in front of the client, right? And the more and more we can automate, the better and better it gets over time, right? So the road mapping effort is really putting attention on it from a product perspective and thinking about it from a market, not a client of one. We can still tailor a product to a client of one, but we're really looking at the broader market. What patterns are we seeing across the 20 times we've delivered in the last 6 months? If we keep running into the same issues, let's work around those issues and make it better. If we're seeing our clients ask for the same types of things over and over again, and we really haven't designed our service around it, let's do that. Where does Copilot fit in the equation? Our clients are asking about it in every meeting. Well, design for it, have a message for it, build it into your process, right? Build it into your roadmap. And frankly, you can use the Copilot to build your roadmap, right? So there's lots of examples of why we want to do a roadmap. It's basically it's investing ourselves in the service, right? That becomes the measurable thing. The service becomes a real thing, and we're making it better and better over time.
Yeah, and the thing that stands out for me there is that that phase of road mapping really ties right back to number one, which is the value equation and what's the customer outcome, the client value ties directly into your roadmap. So, I mean, to your point earlier, that these components are all tied really integrally together, and that you can't have one without the other. So this is probably the one of the most powerful frameworks I think that you can implement as a Microsoft partner is to really understand how to productize these services. So I love what you've shared with us here. As we're wrapping up, Andrew, any final thoughts, anything that you want to share if when people are to take just one thing away from today, what should they take away?
Well, so all of this concept of productization leads to a tremendous number of benefits around accelerating the sales process, delivering more value for the client. Frankly, your people are going to be happier. I'm going to call it silver bullet status. It's one of the few things in the business that I've seen over the years that really impacts the whole process.
Yeah.
And for your clients, for your partners like Microsoft, and for your team and for your profitability, right? But it is an investment and you have to get serious about it. It's hard on the front end. It gets so much easier in the back end when you build the disciplines around it. So highly recommend it. And yes, it can be applied to customized services, but really treat it as an investment in your business.
Yeah, no, I love that, Andrew. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us today. And I think that everyone that's listening now will get a ton of value from that. So if they do want to learn more and to get a chance to speak directly with you, Andrew, where's the best place for people to go and connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So LinkedIn is a great place to go. Direct message me on that. You can also send me an email at andrew@as1.team is another option for you as well, but always happy to catch up. And even if you're not sure if this is right for you, would love to have a conversation with you, kind of talk through your business and understand. Very straightforward in terms of understanding and making recommendations, and we'll see what happens from there.
Great. Well, thanks again, Andrew, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.